Hello, welcome to our Development Control Committee today. Thank you very much for coming. There are no planned fire drills, so if the fire alarm does sound, it's back out through the main entrance and down the ramps. First on our agenda today is the action sheet. No.
So apologies for absence, Chair.
Thank you.
So Councillor Chris Jackson is substituting for Councillor Marley Bennett.
Thanks. My agenda's being a pen again today. Right. Do we have any declarations of interest for today?
Yes, Chair, thank you. As other members of this Parliament might be, I'm familiar with some of the family of the applicant 80 St Andrews Roads, Montpelier development. There's certainly no pecuniary aspect to it, nor do I have any sort of vested interest in it. I just thought for appearances it was worth acknowledging that I do know their family to some extent.
Thank you very much. And for the same reasons, I've also got declaring an interest that doesn't prevent me from taking part in item number 2 as well, because I know members of the family. Okay. Item number 4, minutes of the previous meeting.
So just to clarify, Chair, with this one, then because the meeting was delayed till the 12th of October, there are no minutes here to be approved. Both the minutes of that meeting and this meeting will go to your next meeting for approval. So just to explain why unusually there are no minutes on the agenda at this particular time. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay. Item number 5, action sheet. Do we have anything exciting on there?
Nothing exciting, Chair. I think all the actions which were addressed a fortnight ago at your last meeting, as per the papers, have now been completed, hopefully satisfactorily.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And any appeals to update us on?
No particular updates, Chair, unless any members wanted to ask any questions about any of the cases, which I'll do my best to answer, but nothing that really jumps out at us on this occasion.
Lovely, thank you. Any questions on any of the appeals?
Just the one. Item 11 on page 10. It says the hearing date was the 31st of August. So when do we anticipate a decision on that? And will that come to the next committee, do you think?
Just reopening the papers because they froze on me on my way into the council chamber. I should know that by now. So which item was it?
So it was item 11 on page 10 of the bundle, hearing about 493 to 499 Bath Road.
Yes, we know that one well. So I think we're due a decision from the inspector. We think by the end of this month, maybe, or early November. Yeah. So whilst the hearing commenced on the 31st of August, and it took place during that day, the inspector had already organised a second day, which I think was about a fortnight later. So that's now done. The inspector did everything within the 2 days, including quite an extensive site visit. And whilst there's never a firm date for a decision, I think the inspector did indicate something towards the end of this month or early next month. So certainly by the time the committee meets again, we should really have a decision by then. And I think because it's an important decision. It was DCA in kind of pre-election world, but there's some important principles at stake there in terms of housing delivery, but also kind of design stroke amenity issues for proposed residents, and especially the whole issue about connection to, or the not connection to district heating network in that location. It was more about the on-site solutions in terms of meeting the heat hierarchy. So we eagerly anticipate that decision, and we'll report back to both committees about what the learning points will be from that decision.
Lovely, thank you very much. And then on to enforcement.
Thank you, Chair. I'm delighted again to be reporting on this occasion with a full page of new notices, so 5 on this occasion, and so pleased with that. and it shows real intent in terms of taking enforcement action where we need to. And I know that legal have a number of instructions for further notices again, which hopefully means that we'll be reporting on more notices in meetings to come.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, we will now move on to the public forum for the first item on the agenda, which is Dove Lane. We have read all of your statements, so please just, when I call you up to read your statement, we've got a minute to speak. We have a traffic light system here where you start off on the green light. When it gets to 30 seconds, the amber light will go on, and then when it gets to red, it's time to finish up and I'll start waving at you. And so just keep it as succinct as possible and just come up to the mic when I call your name. Okay, so we've got one speaker on this, which is Uvid Blinik.
The mic should be on, Chair.
Hello. Yeah. Check it. Okay.
Start whenever you want to.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. I'm Uvid Beanick, Development Director at Places for People, and I'm responsible for the overall delivery of Dove Lane. We've worked closely with your officers at Bristol City Council and with the local community to make sure the plans that we presented to you tonight are right for St Paul's. An implemented planning consent exists for the site. These plans improve on those, not least by increasing the number of affordable homes by almost threefold from 25 to 72, 54 of which will be for social rent and 18 are designated as first homes. We're serious about sustainability, and the plans include a day one connection to the citywide district heat network and will achieve a biodiversity net gain of more than 10% in a location which naturally encourages sustainable travel. We want to build these homes quickly. Services and roads have been installed and the site is development ready. If the committee supports the application today, we will aim for people to move into the first homes by the end of 2024, early 2025.
Thank you very much.
People.
So a minute goes really fast. It does. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we're now going to move to the officer presentation. Colleagues, you've been emailed the presentation earlier today, so you can look at it on your own laptops. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening to members of the committee. This is the officer presentation for the Dove Lane development. Tonight's presentation is going to be structured. We'll touch on the amendment sheet first, have a look at the application site, run through of the proposals and any key issues that have come out of the consultation process, and then conclude with the recommendation. So in the amendment sheet which was issued to members, there was an update provided on the Sustainable City team and their final comments, which was one of no objection and in support of the proposals. There was also a list of conditions provided along with some advices. There are some other points just for members to note. So if you go to page 20 of your report, which is the cover sheet, it's been pointed out that the recommendation was currently blank. So apologies for that, it must not have pulled through. The recommendation is to grant subject to planning agreement as set out on page 62 of the report. Also on page 20, the description of development in terms of the commercial, business and service floor space, that should be 670 square metres, not 586 as set out. And last but not least, on the SIL liable, social housing relief can be claimed on the residential dwellings included that are provided as affordable housing, and therefore the amount stated is of 2.1 million. That would be subject to relief. So the SIL liable for this development would be in the magnitude of 1.7 million. So just to point those clarifications out. So moving on to the application site, members have had the benefit of a briefing by the developer team on the 13th of October, so I'll try and not recover too much ground, but it's quite a substantial site, 1.6 hectares in a fairly inner city location in the Ashley ward near the St Paul's area. the aerial photograph shows, so it used to be a former paper factory, which has since been demolished. In terms of what remains within the surroundings of the site, there's the, if I go from towards the west, we have St Paul's Park, which is on the western boundary. To the north, we've got residential areas off Princes Street, some properties off Holston Drive. To the east, we've got Cabot Primary School and also the St Paul's Community Sports Academy. And then we have some business properties that are located off Newfoundland Road and Dove Lane, in close proximity to the site. There is the Wilson Street, which is some 3-storey Georgian terraces, which are listed. And then we have the old schoolhouse, which is an old Victorian school, which has been converted into apartments. These are some of the photographs of the surroundings. So on the top left, there's a building which is located to the north, which is probably the closest residence, which is the old chapel, which is being converted into a residence. There's a picture of St Paul's Park, as pointed out, a picture of a view along Wilson Street. On the top right-hand side is 13 to 17 Dove Lane. It's probably the closest sort of business use to the site. They had responded to the application. I'll cover that aspect in a bit more detail. And then the view from Newfoundland Road, which is probably more prominent for those coming in and out of the city and seeing the cleared site that is presented. So just to recap, the site is allocated. It's in the Bristol Central Area Plan. And it does benefit from a outline consent, which was granted back in 2012. I've just put this image up to show some of those previously approved parameters. In relation to this site as well, the plot labelling of A, B, C, D and E has been reused again. So where the buildings are is broadly in the same locations. The parameters which have changed are some of the heights. There's quite a lengthy description of the application within your papers, but just to summarise, in terms of providing an overview, there are 5 plots. The residential dwellings are provided in all 5 to a total 358. We have the building heights, which range from 5 to 10 stories across the site, 4 to 10 stories across the site. And then there are some commercial, business and service floor space, primarily within plot A, C and D, and I'll point those out in terms of the proposals. In terms of the affordable housing provision on the site, as detailed in your report, that is 72 dwellings, that's 20% of the overall total. In terms of the sustainable energy approach, it's a solar PV, to provide 20% reduction in residual CO2 emissions with a day one connection to the district heat network. In terms of car parking, there's 55 spaces. That includes accessible spaces, electric vehicle charging spaces, and some passive provision for the remainder. So conscious that's quite a lot across the plot, so I'll just go into each in a bit more detail. In terms of the response to consultation to the application, we only had 5 comments. We've had 2 in objection, 1 in support with 2 neutral comments. In terms of some of the points of objection, they've sort of centred on impact on local road network, building heights, relationship with neighbouring community, some impacts on amenity, a desire for more community amenities on the site, and then a very specific objection in terms of the relationship with the business at 13 to 17 Dove Lane. There also has been points of support, both within the comment made in support and the neutral comment, and that's around the design approach, the improvement to public realm and connections through the site, amenity space and provision of balconies, the range of unit sizes which are provided with 50% providing homes to accommodate 4 or more people, and also a support to the proposal to restrict vehicular traffic and parking. So that's an overview of the response we had to the application. These are the plots within the site. So if I go from alphabetical order, we've got Plot A, which is at the end of Wilson Street. We have then got Plot B, which is B1 and B2 along Wilson Place. Then we have Plot C, which is along Dove Lane at the junction of Newfoundland Road. Plot D, which is to the north, and then Plot E, which is adjoins St Paul's Park. So the plots and the overall road layout are broadly similar with the previously approved parameters. In terms of some of the movement associated with the proposals, I think the main ones around vehicular access. Previously, the link from Wilson Street would connect through to the north, and under the current proposals, it's proposed that traffic would continue along Wilson Place and along Newfoundland Road, and that allows the connection through the centre of the site to be pedestrianised, so from the link through to St Paul's and the public space in the centre of the site. You can see the sort of the desire lines for the pedestrian movement through the site. Obviously that's not possible in its current format. And then obviously cycle provision, which I'll touch on in a bit more detail. And then obviously deliveries and servicing, and the proposed strategy for that. As noted in your report, there are improvements in terms of public realm, both within the site, but there's also improvements outside of the sort of red line boundary of the site, which would be secured via sort of Section 278 highway works. That includes cycling provision where Newfoundland Road meets Dove Lane, and that will be improved with improved crossing, as well as some other sort of road movements, and then loading of existing businesses along Wilson Place has also been considered so that the business users that are along there aren't affected. This is a sort of an aerial showing how the building heights are located. Is a helpful view of the relationship with St Paul's Park, the new link which would be provided from it through the development site through to the central space in the middle called Crosses Gardens. You can see how the height has been distributed, so you can see where we've got sort of 4 stories and up to 10 along closest to the M32 and how that's been arranged. This is a aerial view showing that the proposal in context. So we can see that the where the height is located closest to the M32, and then the lowering heights as you go further west. Also, in considering sort of this area, anyone that passes by, there's obviously construction underway and developments emerging along that. So there are buildings of sort of 6 to 7 stories moving along there, and there's also some of the sites which are adjacent to this, to the application site, which are also allocated in the local plan for redevelopment. So that sort of pieces that both the existing and the emerging context together. One of the sort of main responses we had from external consultees is that of Historic England, particularly around the Grade 1 listed St Paul's Church. They have no objection to the proposals. That was on the basis of some additional an addendum which was provided by the applicant. They state one of the views in their response, and if I can just talk you through this image. On the very left-hand side, you'll see what was previously consented. So you will see that in a sort of orange colour. You'll see what's proposed, and I think when you look at what was previously consented, some view of the St Paul's Church was obscured, and then with the proposed proposals, you can begin to see the top of that tower. So they had no concerns with that increased height, given that certainly in some views that the St Paul's Church wasn't concealed. They did make a comment about vegetation on the route through that, and that's been one of the conditions which has been added. One of the main sort of point letters of objection we received is from an adjoining business. There's been responses provided to some of the points raised. It's the business at 13 to 17 Dove Lane, which is a sheet metal working. It's basically a business property with an open yard. The photograph here shows that off Wilson Place. And the relationship here is really with plot B, which is across from the from that open yard. The concerns here being of the activities taking place within the yard and the building, and any restrictions that residential accommodation across the road may have on that. Some further images have been provided, sort of showing that what the view from that yard would be. It's also sort of worth noting that the height in this location is slightly lower, so there is a precedent for there being residential adjacent to the yard. The height here is slightly less than what was previously consented. There's also a section showing what some of the views may be. Obviously there's balconies in place here, so there'll be no direct overlooking from accommodation within it. Two conditions were on the outline consent. One related to screening of these properties, so to make sure that there is no direct overlooking to the yard. The other one was to make sure that noise insulation measures are implemented before any of this accommodation is occupied. We, in the determination of this application, we have applied both of those conditions consistent with the outline consent to make sure that the business yard and the existing operation of that site is safeguarded. We have also had to think about the future. The site across that is in the objection has a lapsed a planning permission which has not been implemented for a mixed-use development, so mainly residential, and that site is also located within the central area plan for redevelopment, so we're having to look at the existing operation and future context, and the balance we have struck is consistent with the outline consent. I thought it helpful just maybe to draw together some comparison with the previously approved details and the application before you. So in terms of residential dwellings, we previously had 230, that is now 358. There has been a reduction in the commercial floor space. There's been an increase in affordable provision, as you will have heard in the public forum statement, so an increase in the total percentage and the total number. In terms of the sustainable energy, the outline consent was quite dated, so it only had to provide 15% reduction in CO2 emissions. This application has improved in the reduction of residual CO2 emissions and also will connect to the district heat network. And associated with the reduction in commercial floor space is the reduction in car parking. So there's a reduction in the total number of car parking spaces. There's obviously improvement with electric vehicle charging provision being provided and contributions to public transport and to upgrade pedestrian routes in the area. So to conclude, the recommendation is one to grant subject to planning agreement. Officers seek delegated authority to finalise wording and conditions and to progress the Section 106 agreement to secure the following obligations. So those obligations are this provision of affordable housing and future viability review, the day one connection to the district heat network. There's a contribution towards fire hydrants requested by Avon Fire and Rescue. And then we've got 4 transport obligations around the travel plan, public transport improvements, which are to the 4 bus stops closest to the site, and then a contribution to improve pedestrian routes to the north of the site, as well as one to traffic regulation order contribution. So that concludes the officer presentation.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Okay, Chris has got a question, Lorraine's got a question. Anybody else want a hand up in the queue? Okay. We'll take Chris and then Lorraine and then I think I saw Andrews. Okay.
I've got a couple. Firstly, I noticed it was in the report there was only 63 trees being planted on the site. It's a big site. I think that should be improved. Is there any way that we can put more trees in?
There's currently no trees, so we've got a gain of 63 across the site. I think we've got a detailed landscaping condition which has got tree planting as part of it. So as part of that, we could explore, is there any potential improvements in that number? I'm not too sure how many more that would result in, but that could be explored as part of that condition.
Yeah, if you could. Secondly, will the construction of this, would there be any job opportunities for local people?
Yes, there will be. There's a condition applied to the consent which requires a scheme of the local employment opportunities to be submitted, so how to maximise job opportunities for local residents.
Right, and finally, I know it's an increase in affordable housing on what it was previously, but I'm still very disappointed that it's only 72, 20%. Is there any way that can be up? So I would be expecting from the developers a lot more affordable housing. I was expecting up around the 40%, because I'm substituting, so I only read this today. I would expect a lot more than 20% affordable housing. And that's my last question. Thank you.
So the approach that the applicant has set out is obviously consistent with the Affordable Housing Practice Note, which is 20% on the premise that construction starts within 18 months. So that is part of the offer which has been made. If that didn't happen, either viability would come into play, or they would have to provide it policy at 40%. I think, apologies if you got late notice, there was a briefing provided on the 13th of October. A similar comment was raised of the applicant. They did say they were in discussions with the council's housing team, but that would be looking at affordable housing outside, so it would be grant funded, so it wouldn't be part of the application. And when pressed on this, I think their places for people target or goal on their sites is to try and achieve with grant 40 to 50%. So what's before you is the 20% secured by Section 106, but in terms of the briefing provided with grant added in, I think that's the overall affordable housing position that I'd look to get to, but I'll maybe let Gary add a bit more to that.
Yeah, just to emphasise, through the Affordable Housing Practice Note, 20% in the central area is policy compliant through planning. So as planning authority, we can't negotiate above that. The 20% though is dependent upon speedy delivery. So if commencement doesn't happen within 18 months, there would be a viability review as set out in the Section 106 agreement that would secure the 20%. So that's those are the terms and conditions of the Affordable Housing Practice Note. I mean, we understand why stakeholders and members feel that there maybe should be more, given that the applicants they do deliver and manage social housing. However, this is the development arm of places for people, as far as we understand. And as David has said, really, there have been some discussions and indications about the possibility of more delivered on the site. However, that would have to sit outside of planning because as I say, it's policy compliant at the moment anyway, and anything more that, say, might be secured through a Section 106 agreement could not then be the subject of grant funding. So I think it's one of these things that as a planning authority we would be securing 20% as policy compliant. Above and beyond that, that's through different processes that have to be undertaken and dependent upon the developers' willingness to explore grant funding and other arrangements.
So
sorry, thank you, Gary, and I hope you have them conversations with the developers after, because I know 20% is it, and I understand the grant funding bit, and I do apologise for not being there on the 30th of October. I only found out I was subbing this morning, or 12 o'clock, so, but thanks for your explanation.
yeah, and so just to follow that up, because as you've alluded, I asked the question at the briefing, is there anything that you know about the viability of getting that 40 to 50% that we've sort of been teased with at the briefing?
So Again, one of the terms and conditions of the Affordable Housing Practice Note is, in order to incentivise speedy delivery but also speedy determination of planning applications, is that we don't require a viability assessment. That's because historically in the central area, as local planning authority, we've been securing less than 20%. So 20% was a bit of a stretch target for developers, and you've got a good example here in that the previous permission was it 11%, 11, 12%? So there's been an enhancement in terms of delivery of this site of 8%, and that was one of the things that the Affordable Housing Practice Note was brought in to achieve, really. But because that kind of option's been utilised in this occasion, we have no viability information at all. All we have is the viability information from a number of years ago, and a lot of things have changed since then. And you know, certainly the 11.5, whatever it was back then, was being achieved at a real push. And in fact, I think the viability report was showing that the scheme wasn't actually viable, and of course the site hasn't been delivered. But now, you know, I know certainly the developers have refreshed their team and are now talking about quick delivery and so on. So my advice would be, you know, if the committee is going to resolve to grant permission, obviously the debate's still to happen, the 20% is policy compliant. Certainly the applicants have heard loud and clear the desire of members, you know, that more should be explored on the site through grant funding, and I think, you know, we can help encourage that.
Great. Do we have, just to sort of give I know it won't be a material consideration, but give the committee a kind of more of a solid view on the potential of it? Any sort of ideas about what the percentage of affordable housing has been generally provided by the development arm of this applicant in the past, or for other applications?
I think we only have the Dove Lane scheme, to my knowledge, that have been progressed in this way, and it was much less than the 20% you're looking at today, really. So that's the only comparison that we can provide you with at the moment.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll take a question from Lorraine next, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Sorry, Gary, if I'm going to sound like a broken record. There's something very different between affordable housing and social housing. I really struggle with that, and I do know the difference, so it's kind of like one of those questions. Over the years, I have seen that at St Paul's, that area of Bristol, being developed, and people being pushed out, and I am just really worried that there is no social housing as opposed to affordable, because I do know the difference. And I've heard what you said about them, complying with the affordable housing policies, but that is a worry for me personally. And I'm sure other residents, even if they've not sort of raised that objection. So that's my first point. I'm kind of just sort of saying it as a point to consider, because there is a difference. My question, I guess, alongside of that would be, what about the social housing? So that's my first question. The second question relates to the school. So Cabot Primary. So I understand that the houses are going to range from 10 story to 5. So I'm hopeful that I shouldn't even, I know I'm going with this, I shouldn't even have to ask you about the overlooking of the school, because I know that area very, very well. So, that's got to be addressed without any kind of suggestion that we're going to have flats overlooking the school. The infrastructure, that park is tiny, so there is an issue about the impact of such a big scale on that tiny little park. That I just wanted to throw that in. And as far as greening the area, is there a consideration about green canopies in regards to the tops of the buildings? Potentially you could add some more greenery, because I know the site is completely bare of anything. So it would be good if the developers, if it was granted, could. Oh, there's a big B. if they could come up with some creative solutions, because you do have the motorway, major traffic all through the day, so that might be an idea. Sorry for taking up so much time. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll answer the first question about the affordable housing, social housing, and David will cover the rest. I think whenever we are here with a report and saying that there's a percentage of affordable housing, we are saying that it meets our policies and that it does meet local housing need. So it will be a split between affordable or social rent. So rent at a level, it's managed by a registered provider, a registered social landlord, at a level that someone on housing benefits can afford. The housing benefit will cover that level of rent, and the service charges are capped as well. So that's truly affordable housing. There is a small element, around 20%, that meets our policies, that is also shared ownership, and in this example, it's the first homes, which again is capped at a level that is considered to be affordable. So whenever we're saying it's 20% affordable, it is genuinely affordable for people in housing need, and is maintained thereafter. Whereas some developers, not this developer, but other developers, will come and tell you, oh yeah, we're providing 50% affordable, and actually 20% might be what we would call affordable. The remainder might be discounted market rent, which will help some people, but not the people in most housing need. So absolutely, the 20% that's been secured here is absolutely policy compliant in terms of affordability. So just to kind of answer that point. So
Gary, before you move on, can you quantify exactly what affordable is in this instance in monetary terms?
It's capped at a level that someone on housing benefit can afford it. Their housing benefit would cover the rent that is being set by the registered provider. So it is in terms of the council's policies, it is affordable. It's social rent.
I'll try and pick up the other points. If I've missed anyone, you can come back. So the school, the sort of relationship between the proposals and the school was a key consideration. I think I'll try my best to explain with some of the diagrams provided, but if you have a look to the sort of northern area of C2, I've got the cursor over if you can see that. So in that area, there's a considerable setback from the car parking area of the school. So it's quite a distance. I don't have a measurement on it, but it's been set back sort of a considerable distance. There's also a Wessex water main runs through this area. It's got quite a large easement associated with it. So there's sort of no potential for any development in that top right-hand corner of the site. So the development's been well set back. In terms of the report, given the heights of the buildings, a study was done of neighbouring properties, and on page 52, Cabot Primary School is covered within that, and that concludes that there's no impact on any windows, which are teaching spaces, and no impact on any player areas. So there's we've considered all of the options and all of the aspects of the proposals in relation to the school, and we're comfortable that there's no amenity issues, no impacts in any of the daylight or sunlight, either to classrooms or to play spaces. So that's that point. I think the next one was on the park, and so I'm not too sure the comment was relating to the size of the existing St Paul's Park or the Crosses Gardens in the centre, but with the proposals that there is quite a gain in terms of sort of public realm provided within the development. So yeah, officers have considered that sort of main route through, which is about 10 metres wide, being quite well landscaped, and then leading to that central area. So the amount of amenity space officers consider both for play, landscape, public realm to be appropriate and quite a positive aspect of the scheme. I think the next point was about roofs, canopies, greenery. So I think if I just go to this one, so there is the intention to have green roofs as part of the proposal, so that is an aspect of this proposal. It is balanced against the need to provide solar PV and a renewable aspiration, so it is very much trying to strike that balance. And there's also the cost implications of green roofs and service charges, and so there's a few things to consider there, but overall that's deemed to be quite a good outcome. And in relation to the sort of I think it was mentioned, but there is a net gain in biodiversity, so in terms of habitats and hedgerows, and that's achieved through the landscaping scheme, shrub planting, brown roofs, rain gardens, and the provision of bird boxes and bug and bee bricks. So there is a lot within the proposal on that sort of canopies and green roofs and things. So hopefully that answers those questions.
Yes. And I forgot to add one final, sorry Guy, just about dentists, doctors, GPs and so forth, because there is one GP surgery on Grosvenor, is it still there? Further up, and obviously in the town centre, but is there any sort of plan, sorry Chairperson, to do any more sort of providing any sort of additional kind of chemist and that's my final question, I promise.
So I can't point at a plan and say it's going to be here, but the proposal includes ground floor units on plot A, C and D, that if that were to come forward, the proposals will allow that to happen, and they are quite central plots to the development. So yeah, that there's nothing to stop that coming forward, but it's not something I can point to.
Great, fabulous. So then Andrew had a question, and then I'll come to you.
More than one. First question was about the heat network, and it was a question about the scale of work that will be required to connect that site to the heat network, and who actually funds that. Is that funded by the developer?
So I missed the bit. There was just noise that came over the background. Sorry. Who funds what? Sorry, what bit?
So the question is about the scale of the work that will be required to connect up to the heat network, and who will fund that. Will that be funded by the developer?
So the developer will fund the connection from their plots to it, but the network's a council network. So it's this is quite a key development in the feasibility of a network in the St Paul's area. So colleagues in Energy Services and Sustainable City team have had quite a discussion around making sure that this would connect and help make that case. But I don't know, Gary, if you want to say anything more about the council provided heat network.
Yes, so the heat network is progressing at pace around the city. That will only accelerate through the City Leap arrangements, and so it's an investment by the city in the network. There's a variety of funding for that, of which I'm certainly not an expert about, but I know that the City Leap arrangements help the delivery of that at a greater pace now. This would be, I think, a new aspect of the network, but certainly colleagues in the energy service were really keen to get this site connected, because it's really a key part of the viability of the network, and they will recoup a lot of the investment costs through the connection charges that they would levy for this and other developments as well. Because I don't think that there will just won't be part of the network that just connects one development, because that, no matter how big it is, that probably won't be viable. So there'll be a number of other developments in the area that will do this. Like we said, there's other developments nearby, and also there's the Froome Gateway area, the other side of the motorway. It's obviously creates a challenge, but that there's an area there not too far away again that will be new development, and we would expect to have day one connections to the new network. So it's kind of a bit of it's an investment by the city and its partners, and certainly it's kind of helped by these connections, by having those paying customers, developments that are happening around the same time that the network's being provided.
Thank you. That's helpful. So presumably they're on board with doing that development in tandem with the timeframes that the developer are talking about for getting these buildings up and occupied.
Yes, it's always a kind of a moment of tension when the respective timescales are being discussed, and certainly it's the connection would be secured through the Section 106 agreement, or the principle of connection, and then there's a more detailed commercial document between the council's energy service and the developer, which is the connection agreement that sets out the terms and conditions of that, and also the obligations of both parties with regards to that. And if for any reason the heat network won't be ready on day one, an alternative source of heat has to be provided, and has to be a viable, legitimate source as well. So this was, we're probably in about the third or fourth year of doing this now, so I think ourselves and certainly the energy service is well versed in doing this now. So it gets slightly easier every development we deal with.
Thank you. My next question was about the waste services, and as I read the comment from Bristol Waste, there were a number of aspects that they hadn't been happy with in what had been presented to them, including the distance of space for their trucks from the bin storage. Have all those concerns been allayed or rectified, or can they be conditioned?
Yeah, so a response direct to them was provided by the applicant in response to their concerns. So we have that, and given the phased nature of this site, there's a service and refuge, I think it's called refuge and servicing plan for the site, which would again bring forward more details of how each plot would be managed. So and colleagues in transport have reviewed the ability for refuse vehicles and suitable servicing bays, etc., being provided within the site. So, we're comfortable that the adequate response is being provided, and any further detail can be provided by way of condition.
Lovely, thank you very much. I've got a question about the car parking spaces and allocations. So there is a list on page 49 of the number of spaces, how they're allocated, a little bit about how they're distributed through the site, and the fact that one space is reserved for car club vehicles. So my question was, how are spaces going to be allocated? Are they just going to be available? Are they going to be distributed amongst the different tenure types, or are they just going to be available to the private homeowners? And also, I know that one space is reserved for car club vehicles, but is there any commitment to funding or supporting car club car to actually be in the space?
I'll just pass you to Philippa on parking. Thanks.
Within planning, it's quite difficult for us to define that clearly, but what we have done is made sure there's permit free in the they're not entitled to permits in the area, so that controls the parking there is limited, and it has come down from the original level. And in respect to the car club, we do ask for membership as well as part of our standard requests. But obviously, by the time they get to occupy, if they want to increase the amount of parking for car clubs, we would welcome that, but it isn't a planning requirement. They've met our basic requirement, and they made an effort to reduce their parking. So it's better. If it had come in today, I would have been tougher, but it's compliant with what that is, and I think in that area it's appropriate.
I'm not arguing it's appropriate. So, so there's car club space. So is there going to be a car club operating there, or have you gone as far as you can in providing the space?
We recommend they work with the registered car club providers in Bristol, but they're free to create their own if they want to. That's the thing. But we put them in contact. It's much better if they join with our general provider of that, and so yes, it's optional, but we give our preference of who they should allocate that space to.
And to just add, there's a condition on to say that that space shall be a car club space and be provided as such, whoever the operator is. So it's not a space, it can't be a car club space, if that makes sense.
And one final question, Chair, if you indulge me. There's obviously the 5 blocks on the site, and it's quite a large site. Is it anticipated that there'll be a phasing approach to the buildings being finished and occupied, or is it sort of all in one? And if it is a phasing approach, is there any chance of the social housing being done first?
So we have, for this very reason, we have requested a phasing plan to be a condition so that the council knows what the intended delivery is. I don't think we can compel the order of that phasing, but yeah, at least that phasing plan allows the sort of phased delivery of the site, so to manage any disruption and things locally, but also details can be provided on a plot by plot basis. And yeah, a draft phasing plan was provided, but obviously yeah, that will be developed should a consent be forthcoming, and through that condition we would know what the intended delivery would be, so in terms of those phases. But yeah, it is intended to be phased.
Thank you very much. Guy?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at housing type and mix towards the bottom of page 38, and I'm having trouble characterising this to myself. I'm trying to balance the 2 SPDs that are sort of in play here. The St Paul's SPD 10 from 2006, I had the impression that that was an SPD that was developed with quite a lot of input actually from the local community and local councillors, that was very much focused on improving the quality of life for residents of St Paul's and balancing that community, or providing a more balanced and sustainable housing stock for that community. And that SPD would require at least 20% of the total number of dwellings, which obviously this development falls short of by more than half. We also have the urban living SPD from 2018 that is about largely increasing density around the city centre, the city centre taken quite broadly as a whole. Now in the report, I've not heard of the housing enabling officer before, but has determined that we should go with the more recent document on the basis that the St Paul's SPD relies upon evidence less contemporary than that available. Now I'm curious, that more recent evidence, is that concerning St Paul's as an area, as a community, or are we talking about the city centre more broadly as a whole? And I'm particularly thinking in reference to the final sentence of the penultimate paragraph, 183 homes, 51.1%, are providing homes to accommodate 4 or more people. Is that referring to the area covered by the St Paul's SPD or to the urban living SPD?
Sorry, could you ask the question again? So this is page 38 of the report. Is that the one? So, I mean, I can chat through this section of the report, and if I don't answer your question, so you are correct. The St Paul's SPD was adopted back in 2006. The housing enabling officer has reviewed the the proposed housing mix and the affordable housing offer as part of the proposal. Now, they believe that that meets the identified needs that we currently have and provides a mix to meet the demand within an apartment-based schemes, and also welcomes that there are larger apartments as part of that, which can accommodate families. This development, as you've pointed out, it includes 3-bedroomed apartments, 3-bedroomed homes. So it's about 8.6%, 31 dwellings. So I think the point here is that SPD predates the core strategy, which has set targets since 2006 for across the city, and the National Planning Policy Framework, which has introduced a way of housing delivery and how those numbers of need and things are set out for Bristol. Now, this is looking at Bristol as a whole, city of Bristol, not St Paul's individually. So it's for the city as a whole. And yeah, as part of this, we have looked at that. The urban living SPD is more up to date. It's been prepared to help meet that growing need which is there. It's been helped to ensure that if densities increase, that quality isn't diminished, and all of the things that support families, such as play space, external amenity space, access to good quality public realm and connections is all in place. That obviously is a more recent document, and that obviously seeks to increase densities on a site such as this. And then I think the reference you had to more contemporary is how the council is reviewed in terms of its performance in housing delivery, and that is the housing delivery test results, and that is a target Bristol is given to meet every for a 3-year period, and it gets published every year. And currently the council has not met the target, so therefore the need to provide housing to keep up with the rate of delivery is increasing. So hopefully that explains things from 2006 to today. But if there's any further questions, I'm happy to clarify.
I suppose my concern was that it read as though the more contemporary up-to-date evidence wasn't that the housing mix in St Paul's had changed since the SPD from 2006 had happened. It was simply that the council had produced a newer document that covered a broader area that said that the density across that central area as a whole was more important than the housing mix in St Paul's.
I'll let Gary answer this, but there's been no update to the St Paul's SPD, so it remains a material consideration. And in terms of my report and how we have considered it, we have given it the weight in terms of its consistency with the National Planning Policy Framework. So I'll let Gary add further.
Yeah, I think hearing the question, I guess the inconvenient thing is that there were different documents at different times. They looked at different things, so you're not comparing apples with apples, really. The St Paul's SPD does still stand as an SPD, so it should be given weight. There was consideration during the preparation, particularly of the central area plan, which is part of the local plan, to a higher level than the SPD, as to whether the St Paul's SPD had basically been superseded, but the decision was made to retain the St Paul's SPD. Since then, though, as we've said, really, the urban living SPD has been prepared and adopted, and looking to increase densities, but within particular quality parameters. And on top of that as well, we as a city don't meet our own housing need and don't meet the government's housing delivery test as well. So those latter two things would tend to push decision makers to acceptance of higher densities, and therefore a knock-on impact on the number of 3-bedroom properties, you would think. But both SPDs are there and both have to be given weight, really, and as individual decision makers you ultimately have to make your own minds up in terms of what weight you give each document, but I particularly think it is material that the Urban Living SPD and the Housing Delivery Test, they are more recent than the St Paul's SPD.
Thank you. And just a very quick second one. But looking at the affordable homes and the first homes, it sounded from the report as though the affordable homes were going to be pepper potted throughout the development as a whole, but that the applicant was asking for, I think the term used was flexibility with the first homes. And I was just wondering if that is something that we can condition. In other words, we could add a condition to prevent the developer from putting all of the first homes in the least desirable corner of the least desirable building.
The affordable housing would be subject to Section 106 agreement. So as part of that process, a plan would have to be provided for the council to sign off. So I don't think the conditions necessarily needed. That 106 requires that final 10-year plan and where those units would be. And if as you outline, they're predominantly put in an undesirable location, the housing officer would be well within their rights to say that's not acceptable. So I don't think an additional that condition that you seek is already there as part of the 106. That 10-year plan has to be provided, so that has to be deemed acceptable before they would be, that would be the agreed location for those units. So that control is already there.
Great. You've all taken some of my best questions, but one of the things I noticed was that it's only 2%, so seven units are accessible or adaptable to being accessible. Is there any way that we can improve on that?
So yes, I'll just quickly go to that.
It's page 37 on the report.
If you possibly just revert back to page 30 of the report. So policy DM4 talks about wheelchair accessible housing. So our own policies require 2% to be wheelchair accessible or adaptable for residents who are wheelchair users. And also that's an interpretation of building regulations. So in this application, as you point out, that 2% requirement of policy is met, and 7 are provided. So, and it also points out that those units will have allocated parking. So, in terms of meeting our own policies, that is met. I don't think we can sort of seek to seek any more than that.
Can we strongly encourage, in the same way that we're strongly encouraging more than 20%? That hopefully more would be accessible, because we've got an ageing population that we do need more accessible homes.
I think, Chair, there's probably a couple of messages we could give out. Obviously, the developers are hearing this, and so they hear that desire from members. But also, as David said, really, this meets the policy. We can't push it beyond that. And obviously, the new local plan consultation is out shortly, so we'd encourage members on the local plan working group to push for a higher standard going forward, because that will then give us the tools to secure a higher percentage in future.
Great, thank you. And then it was slightly touched on earlier by Councillor Francis about the sort of proximity to the school, two schools. Taking it from the other side for the residents, what sort of soundproofing will be required for the residents so that they're not... I have some schools in my ward, and residents in local blocks find it quite noisy. So what can we do to sort of, and also so I'm thinking C1 for that, and then block C2 with its proximity to the M32. Like what mitigations there?
Yes, Chair. I will. So we had a noise assessment submitted as part of the application. That was reviewed by the Pollution Control Environmental Health team. They had suggestions on that report in terms of providing the comfort. So The assessment was updated. I think from in terms of noise from the school, I think that was generally deemed to be okay. I think the environmental health officer sought more information on the noise from the 13 to 17 Dove Lane, as outlined, because of the operations that happened within that yard, and the DBS studio, which is off in that Newfoundland Wilson Place area. So the report provided, I think if you just have a look at page 34 of your reports, that's got the pollution control officer's comments, but that report seeks to identify mitigation measures capable of providing suitable levels of attenuation to achieve the required internal sound levels. So the environmental health officer says, I would agree that this has been achieved, but would expect final details of the attenuation to be used to be provided by way of condition. And there's a condition which is added to the which is part of the amendment sheet, which is, so this would be for each plot, so the ones you've mentioned, but all plots across the scheme of noise insulation measures shall take into account that report, which is deemed acceptable, along with that information, and those measures shall be implemented prior to the commencement of the use and permanently maintained. So that detailed report would say what specific measures are being used adjacent to the school, adjacent to the welding yard, possibly further north. So that would be secured by way of condition, but noise has been considered, and you've quite rightly picked out the M32 also, which is quite a noisy environment. So yeah, all those areas have been covered, assessed, and there's a sort of a suite of conditions on page which the environmental health officer has requested.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions before we move to the debate? Nope. Okay, who would like to open our debating section? Fabian and Andrew.
I have to admit, I mean, it's now nearly 7:10 and we're still on the first item. I must admit it's something of a record of the number of questions that have been asked over a housing scheme. I really like it. I mean, yes, it's in a city, it's at the bottom of the M32, it's a site that's been allocated, it's policy compliant, and I actually rather like the contemporary design of the thing. So I think it's, you know, and we need the houses. We desperately need houses. So I will definitely be supporting this. I consider it something of a no-brainer, and I really, you know, look forward to seeing, you know, this currently disused, redundant area transformed into providing housing that people need. So I'll be supporting it, no question.
Good, thank you. And also, I appreciate it's taken us some time, but we do need to make sure we get the right housing, not just any old housing. Andrew, and then I think I saw Lorraine's hand.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be supporting this as well. I have one or two reservations. One is the presence of this 10-storey block, but I appreciate that what is being proposed has a sort of variety of scale buildings, a variety of height buildings in the site compared to the sort of more uniform approach of previous, and it looks like a really good high quality development. The other slight reservation I have is that there is a comment in the report of the number of single aspect flats in a number of the blocks, including the block that will be social rent. And that is a minor concern, but overall I will be supporting this application.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Yes, in principle, that site had been vacant for many years, and there is no problem with providing houses in Bristol. I stand by the fact that we are getting to a point in the area where local people probably will no longer be able to live there, even though they've lived there, many people, for decades. That's where I grew up when I was younger as well. So I think it's really important for us not to underestimate when building work is being done in the city and who will be ultimately impacted on. I will obviously be supporting the scheme, but obviously we need to ensure that the the developers, sorry, the developers stick to the plan, and later on down the road doesn't suddenly reduce the number of affordable houses that will be available, because that's really important. Thank you.
Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to be supporting this as well. I think it's as Fabian said, it's a fantastic inner city site with. But like I say in my questions, I would like double the amount of affordable housing, double the amount of trees, which I think can be easily done. Great about the electric vehicle charging and the cycle parking. So I will be supporting this, and I'm happy to move to the vote, and I'll propose we grant it.
Yeah, and I think just to sum.
Second.
Yeah. Hold your horses there, Chris. Guy and Leslie would also like to put something in as well. Guy, did you want to say something?
I'll be quick, Chair. Thank you. It's going through, and there is so much about this to recommend itself, and as every other member of the committee has either said or I'm sure will say, we desperately need more housing in the city. The only thing that troubles me is that clash between those two SPDs. And I don't like the idea of a community-led plan that's been produced by local residents in order to deliver a more balanced and sustainable community, setting a target and deciding this is what our vision is of our future, and this is the kind of housing mix we need to get there. Only to have their proximity to the city centre used as a justification for kind of steamrollering that project and saying, no, we just need more density near the city centre, build more, cram more and more in. And this neighbourhood just happens to be the one that takes the brunt of it. And St Paul's, I think it's fair to say, is a distinct neighbourhood and community in its own right, with a very, very proud history. And I don't like the idea of them being treated as just another part of the centre. And that's my one reservation with this. As I say, there's a lot to like here, but I really wish we could have done something just to bring this development more in line with both the SPDs, if it were possible. And I really want to make sure that the affordable and first homes are properly pepper potted throughout, but I appreciate where we're at. Thanks.
Thanks. So before we do move to a vote, and we will get that away, I think we just want to sort of sum up that the will of the committee, from what I've heard, is there's a really strong desire to make sure that the will of the local community, as indicated in the SPD of 2006, is sort of really taken into account, and there is actually more truly affordable and social housing for the local community in this development as it kind of gets developed. That we have more trees, as Chris has noted, and more accessible units as possible, more car club spaces if we can, and for it to be a truly mixed and not segregated development. I think that's obviously not something that we can mandate as part of this, but it seems the will of this committee that we'd all really like to see that as this development does progress, and I think we'll move to a vote with enthusiasm now. Who's going to second it? Because I know you're all very desperate to go. Okay, I'll let Fabian do it because he's so desperate. I will start over here and do a roll call. Leslie? 4. Thank you. Lorraine?
4.
Guy?
4.
Fabian?
4.
Katya? 4. Chris?
4.
Andrew?
4.
Me is 4. Thank you very much.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Hooray. Thank you very much. We'll just take a quick 10-minute break so that, cause I think quite a lot of people in the room are for this application, so leave you time to move on, and then we'll move to the next item. Thank you very much. Good, excellent. Okay, so item number 2 on the agenda is St Andrews Road. The first person to call up is Councillor Tim Y, who's reading a statement on behalf of a resident. Thank you, Tim.
As councillor, I have been approached by numerous neighbours to this development. Whilst they understand the urgent need for housing in Bristol, they want to see some proportionality and have made a counter-proposal to that effect. This statement is one I've been asked to read by Graham Davidson, a neighbour who can't be here. 73 to 93 Richmond Road form a Grade 2 listed terrace with to date no residential development in their back gardens. An original covenant restricted development to non-residential buildings not more than 15 foot high. A Grade 2 listing applies to the whole curtilage, and the proposal is within that curtilage. As the case officer has noted, in principle, curtilages of listed sites should not be subdivided. Creating a separate dwelling creates a separate curtilage. If that problem can be overcome, the heritage of the site, as protected by the listing, should be respected. This would limit any building to around 15 foot, subservient to the host house and other neighbours. This proposal is 2 stories and would overbear the host and other houses and gardens. Should the curtilage be allowed to be subdivided, we have offered the compromise of a pitched roof single-storey residential building with rear access, which would help protect the benefits derived from the covenant and the listing. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next we have Emma Lanham, please.
So, at the moment...
Oh, into the mic, please. Can you do it into the mic, because otherwise we can't hear you. Thank you.
Good. At the moment, there's no residential building at the rear of our terrace. If you grant this application, a precedent would be set for residential development within the curtilage of this beautiful Grade 2 listed terrace. A huge decision with inevitable far-reaching consequences. Something would be lost forever. Montpelier Conservation Group and your own Conservation Advisory Panel are both strongly opposed to this application. There are 66 objections posted on the website. As a terrace, we are united in our opposition. I urge you to reject it. However, if you are minded to allow residential development, a compromise could be a 1-bedroom, single-storey dwelling that is completely subservient to the main house. Both parties would have to compromise. Something would be lost, but something valuable could also be preserved. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Okay, next we have Piers Calcasoni, please.
Good evening, councillors. I just want to make a very short statement with reference to one of the notices that is attached to the application. And this is to do with a restriction on the parking permits being allowed to any future residents. While we understand the reasoning behind this advice, we respectfully ask for the committee to consider a modification to this advice such that no more than one parking permit be allowed for the property. And or I'd like to add that we say for the restriction on visitor parking to be reconsidered. Thinking about this real world scenarios, this restriction would be unfair and potentially a compromise to any residents' health and safety. We think it only appropriate to allow visitor parking. All visitors to Bristol residential parking areas should, we feel, be treated equally.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can I ask you to... Thank you. Okay, Colin Pemble, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the brownfield site in a highly accessible location in an urban area. A dilapidated garage that's really serving no purpose. There's antisocial behaviour because there's limited surveillance on that part of the road, and developing this site would surely make a positive contribution to the local area, the general street scene, the townscape, and it will be a good place to live, exceeding the space standards, incorporates renewable energy, ecological benefits with the new landscaping that will go in. And it's these sorts of brownfield sites that should be developed. It's been very carefully designed, so it is subservient to the host building behind, but also articulating the changes in scale between the existing modern houses on the left and garaging on the right. So, given the professional opinion...
Thank you very much.
I hope you
Thank you.
endorse the officer's recommendation.
Jessica Warwick, please.
Is there not space to preserve the land situating a Grade 2 listed terrace with gardens in a densely populated and central area of Bristol, and when the people living there know and are trying to tell you what will be lost? The properties provide options for living. We live with my mother and my children, and we're aware that we could not manage without the access at the back. If the current owner of 93 Richmond Road opened the back doors, the tenants of his house could benefit from their garden also. The applicant does not live here and continues to be vague in the detail of the plans. The light in the proposed living spaces is compromised, not to be overlooked when more people are working from home. Our community has spent time considering and responding honestly and sincerely. The listed terrace with its gardens is an asset to Montpelier and to the city. Ending with a quote, "In return for these spectacular gifts of the earth, say to yourself, what am I about to do with that? What is my accountability in return for everything I've been given?"
Thank you. Thank you very much for your public forum statements. Okay, over to the officer's presentation now, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for the demolition of an existing garage and the construction of a part 2-storey, part single-storey mews house. So this is the site location plan. The application site is shown in red. Currently a single-storey garage fronting St Andrews Road to the north. The site is located to the rear of number 93 Richmond Road, which is this property here, which is in residential use. The site is under the same ownership as number 93 Richmond Road. However, there's no access in between the sites. So residents of number 93 can't access St Andrews Road from the rear, and likewise, there's no through access from St Andrews Road to Richmond Road. The application site is located in the Montpelier Conservation Area, and numbers 73 to 93 Richmond Road are Grade 2 listed. So that's approximately, I think, this property here up to the application site. So this is the existing front elevation facing St Andrews Road. A single-storey garage, which dates from about the 1950s. The adjacent building to the south, on the left-hand side, this hand side is the coach house in ancillary use for residents of number 91 Richmond Road, which is the property beyond. And to the north, on the left-hand side, is a new build terrace of 4 properties constructed approximately 5 years ago in place of existing garages. So this is a view facing north, where you can see a bit more clearly the adjacent development of the new build terrace. On the other side of the road, there are a number of new build residential properties of various styles. These are located to the rear of Cromwell Road, which is located up a bit further to the north up there. This is a view facing south. You can see the adjacent coach house on the left, and small-scale ancillary buildings which are located to the rear of the listed terrace. These are some photos from within the site. We're showing the general state currently used for storage and relatively overgrown and in a poor state of repair. So as previously mentioned, the application is for the demolition of the existing garage and construction of a part single-storey, part 2-storey mews house. This is the proposed front elevation. The 2-storey element will contain a pitched roof with a front gable, and the single-storey element will be flat-roofed with a green living roof. The building will be constructed of brick with brick detailing and design elements. This is a proposed street scene elevation on the top, which might be a bit more useful with regards to understanding the impact on the street scene. It shows the overall scale and design of the proposal in the context of the adjacent new build terrace and also the adjoining coach house. Also, this sectional drawing shows the proximity between the development and Richmond Road and the general scale and relationship between the buildings. This plan shows the garden landscape proposals which will be delivered as part of the development. There will be a private garden for the new application property and also a separate enhanced garden space for residents of number 93. So a number of revisions have been made to the application during the course of the application process, and this has generated 3 rounds of public consultation, which have generated 30, 15 and 21 objections respectively. Objections have also been made from Councillor Y, who you've already heard of. These objections predominantly raise concerns regarding the principle of development, impact on the listed buildings, loss of greenery, urban design, impact on the conservation area, impact on surrounding residential properties with regards to amenity, highway safety, and also the impact on local parking provision. These issues are covered in the report in detail. However, I'll just touch on a few issues that come up most frequently in the public comments. So with regards to the overall principle of development, there are no objections to constructing a new residential property at this site. The site's in a sustainable location and the existing garage isn't considered to hold any particular merit with regards to the street scene or conservation area. Further, this part of the conservation area is now characterised by mews houses, and this is referenced in the Montpelier Conservation Area Character Appraisal. So this quote here is a direct quote from the character appraisal, which says that the character of the upper part of St Andrews Road, which is where this application site is, until recently strongly influenced by the gardens of houses in Richmond Road and Cromwell Road. The Richmond Road gardens are now being developed with houses in a variety of styles. So overall, it's considered that development accords with the character appraisal in that respect. You can see from the layout plan of the wider area that there are a number of new mews houses which have been constructed at the rear gardens of properties along Richmond Road facing St Andrews Road. So the overall principle of mews development in this part of the conservation area is already established, and the principle of removing the garage and introducing mews style development is accepted in principal design terms within the context of the conservation area and the street scene. The overall design and the scale of development is also considered to be acceptable. The dwelling taking the appearance of a traditional subservient mews house, and the council's urban design team are happy with the proposals. So with regards to the impact on the setting of listed buildings, it is recognised that this will be the first residential development to the rear of the Grade 2 listed terrace that's made up of numbers 73 to 93 Richmond Road. So that's this terrace here shown in purple. Whilst there are some structures at the rear garden, these are all currently ancillary subservient single-storey outbuildings. However, it is recognised that there are some mews properties, new additions constructed to the rear of some listed buildings a bit further up Richmond Road. Number 100 St Andrews Road in particular can be seen here. So the concerns raised by residents regarding the impact on the setting of listed buildings has been carefully considered by officers, particularly the council's conservation officer, who confirmed that following amendment there will be no perceivable harm to the setting of these listed buildings. The overall scale and siting of the development will be in keeping with surrounding mews properties and will overall be proportionate and subservient to the main 4-storey listed buildings that make up that terrace, preserving their setting and the historic interest. The removal of the garage itself, which currently attracts graffiti and contributes to a sense of decay and neglect, something which is noted in the conservation area character appraisal, Additional landscaping and improvements to the rear garden will also enhance the setting of the listed building number 93 Richmond Road. So overall, the Council's Conservation Officer raised no objections to the proposal, was happy to support it. In terms of the amenity impact on neighbouring properties, the overall footprint and siting of the development will be similar to other Muse properties which have been approved in the local area. The separation distance and relationship between the property and Richmond Road will also be consistent with neighbouring properties, and the scale and overall siting will ensure that there will be no harmful overbearing impact on Richmond Road or any harmful overshadowing. To avoid any harmful overlooking arising, there is one rear window to the first floor element, the upper floor level. However, this will serve a bathroom and therefore will be obscure glazed to ensure that there will be no direct overlooking between that upper floor and Richmond Road. So all of the issues are covered in detail in the report, and overall officers are satisfied that the proposal is acceptable for this context, and as such approval is recommended subject to the conditions set out in the report and summarised on screen. Thank you.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Okay, I'll let Fabian kick us off with a question.
Got a couple of questions, please, Chair. The listed buildings in Richmond Road and the proposed site is facing St Andrews Road, is that correct?
Yes.
Also, looking at the slide that's got the 4 Muse houses that were built, that'll do. You see the 4 Muse houses and then, you know, which are very ultra modern, and then the proposed development, which if anything looks a little old fashioned compared to it. Looks like something might have been put up 20, 30 years ago, but was the impact of those buildings, those 4 Muse houses, on the listed buildings in Richmond Road a factor when permission was granted and those were built?
Yes, it was. And when that application was considered for the adjacent terrace, that was about 15 years ago, I think. And that development did originally include the development of this plot. However, that was removed from the overall scheme due to perceivable harm to the setting of the listed buildings, and that is acknowledged. However, it's the view of officers, particularly conservation officers, that times have changed since that decision was made 15 years ago. So there's been a material change in both local and national planning policy, with a more clear emphasis on redevelopment of brownfield land in sustainable areas, and also the issues that the city is facing is different, with a more profound need for additional housing, and therefore it's accepted that there are some sites in the city that maybe 15 years ago would not have been considered acceptable for housing, whereas now they are, and this is such a site.
Can you tell us more about the various rounds of consultation? Because there's been 3, and there's been like a compromise suggested by some of the objectors. So can you tell us what compromise has already happened?
So the original scheme was a lot bigger. That was reduced in scale. The design amended. This is following advice from conservation officers and urban design officers. A revised scheme was submitted, which again was considered slightly too large, and again it had some amendments required for the design, and then this most recent set of plans was submitted, which generated the 3rd round of consultation. So essentially the scheme has been reduced in its scale, and the design has been amended to get to where we currently are. It's accepted that any further reduction in height would obviously have less of an impact on the listed buildings than the current proposal. Overall, however, that wasn't considered necessary, as urban design officers and conservation officers were satisfied that this scheme, as submitted, was acceptable, so no further amendments were considered necessary.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Can I picture it? I'm sorry. On the plan, page 14. Sorry, page 14. I'm trying to get my bearings.
Did you say page 14?
Page 14 on the.
Can you put your mic down a bit
sorry,
so we can hear you a
I've
bit
got
more?
it in the stupid place there. Page 14 of the.
Of the officer report?
Of the Sorry, yeah.
Hold on.
Slide 14.
Is it the presentation that the officer just did?
That one.
That one. Yep.
So picture the bottom left. That blue house there. What house is that? The house that's going to be where's that house's garden? Sorry, because it's really confusing. So the house that we're looking at, bottom left.
Yes, so this blue house is number 93. That's it.
And is the plot the garden of 93?
So this plot here is the garden to 93. Yeah. So that's the
and that's the bit that's going to be built on.
The garden will be redeveloped as a new garden for that property. It's this sort of single-storey garage here that will be the main area of development.
So that plot belongs to that blue house.
Yeah.
The single-storey garage belongs to that blue house. So I'm being really thick. Sorry.
Yeah. So this is probably a bit clearer. So that the blue property is this property here, number 93.
Right. Okay.
And that garden was currently this space here, which will be redeveloped for garden space. So the garden for that property will be retained and enhanced. And currently where the garage is will be demolished and a new property will be built there.
Right. I'm with you. Okay.
So just to clarify, the pictures of the garden in a state of disrepair is the garden of number 93, Richmond Road, that's occupied by the applicant's tenants?
Yes, I believe it is.
And so, so that we're being, okay, so the landlord or the applicant has allowed that garden to get like that in the first place, presumably, and is now going to build on it?
I don't know who was responsible for management of the garden, but
okay, all right,
that's
thanks.
the current,
Yeah, I think that was what was kind of creating confusion. Okay, Guy, did you have some questions?
That's a really obscure one, Chair. Apologies, or potentially. I just want to check, and it might be that you wish to refer to one of your colleagues if there's someone that's an expert in the residence parking zone. I just wanted to raise a query in relation to the prohibition on the property getting, if it's granted permission, the prohibition on visitors passes, and I just wanted to check as to whether or not that included. I'm assuming it doesn't include EVPs, but I've had a number of bits of casework lately where people like midwives and carers were relying on those visitors passes, and obviously this committee is bound to bearing in mind the Equalities Impact Assessment and the Equalities Act, that we need to bear in mind the possibility that someone might be in this home that needs a full-time carer or might even need a midwife. And I just wanted to check that they would be exempt from any sort of ban on those visitors permits.
I can confirm that our recommendation was they're exempt from both a resident permit and a visitor permit. The new, if you choose to approve it. The reason being is we have a finite amount of curbside, and half of the criticism was that it would be more vehicles in the area, and our way of dealing with that when there is a parking control in the area is that's our best option, is to prioritise the existing residents, the existing parking arrangements for the existing residents, and but we do have a finite amount of curbside, so we don't really have options on that.
If it helps, can I add, not trying to cop out of this at all, the approach to saying that new dwellings within existing RPZs shouldn't benefit from residence parking zones for the precise reason that Pip set out is long established. Essentially, it's council policy. The mechanism for that, though, is with all planning decisions, this is purely an advice. So it's to manage the expectations of the applicant and subsequent occupiers, that when it doesn't stop them applying for a residence permit, and the advice is to both to the developer and also to our colleagues in the transport authority. So ultimately, whether anybody, whatever their circumstances are, so applying the public sector equalities duty, it's their decision as to whether the permit is issued. At this stage, it's purely an advice from the local planning authority to the applicant and to the transport authority that in these circumstances, you're unlikely to get a permit and actually you shouldn't be given a permit, but it's not the actual decision about the permit.
Lorraine, and then Andrew.
Just a quick one. St Andrews Road is a conservation side of this, isn't it?
Yeah, the whole site's in a conservation area.
And Richmond Road?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just, based on what you said about the changes in the planning or housing regulations or whatever it was going to stop, so looking at your slide 14, what's going to stop all those garages just being developed into houses, or just sort of like, because you've already said there's precedent, so what's going to stop this sort of like whole area just being taken over by new houses? I'm just curious.
Well, if any site did come forward, it would be under the same scrutiny as this application. So whilst it is essentially setting a precedent for the development of those rear gardens, it's not setting a precedent that would be considered harmful, given that the recommendation is for approval. Every application is ultimately assessed on its own individual merits, though, so it wouldn't be a case that now one's been allowed, it's, all of those garages can just be demolished and developed for housing. The application would be carefully considered, the same as this application has been, and it'd have to be appropriate for the setting of the listed buildings and the character of the conservation area.
Sorry, thank you.
Andrew.
Hi, just one brief question, or hopefully brief. There's a comment from the Montpelier Conservation Group in the report, and there's a bit of it on page 79 where it makes a comparison with previous application in 2020, which was withdrawn, but it suggests that one of the pieces of advice was that the proposed development should be less deep than of a lower depth than is now proposed, but it also suggests that it should have been of a lower height, and there's a suggestion in the comment from the conservation group that the proposals now are taller than the proposal in 2020, and I just wonder if you can give me just a sense of the difference between that application and this application.
So yeah, the previous 2020 application was withdrawn following concerns raised by urban design officers and conservation officers regarding not only the scale but the design and the siting and the plot coverage. So the proposal before us now is smaller than that in both footprint and height. Unfortunately, I can't give a specific measurement on the difference, but it is noticeably smaller, and indeed it's even smaller than the application as it was originally submitted in this instance. So there's been essentially 4 reductions and amendments to the scale since that original application was submitted.
So the comment suggesting that there has been an increase in height is wrong, or it's wrong based on what is now in front of the committee, even if it, I appreciate there's been a number of iterations. I would say
this proposal before committee is the smallest scale that anything at the site has been.
I've got a really quick one about bins. I can't work out where the bins would be kept. I'm sorry, I'm sure it's in here somewhere.
Sorry, I can find that. Sorry, I didn't include these in the presentation, but the bins and bikes will be located at the front in the sort of small setback recessed area.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any more questions, or should we move on? Okay, Leslie. Into the mic, because I can't hear you.
Can't we have a site visit on this one, because it seems to be very controversial, and 66 people in that terrace are very upset about it.
Chair, just to the 66 objectors, that's the total objections over 3 rounds of consultation, I think. So yeah, it was 30 originally, then 15, and then back up to 21. So one assumes they're the same people. It's not you shouldn't accumulate them to be the 66.
But you only got 6 on the other side.
And are they the same people objecting, or are we just making an assumption? Like, can we assume?
Primarily, they were the same people who objected every time, yeah.
So how many people objected? How many individual people?
I wouldn't be able to, well, in the first instance 30, in the second instance 15, and then the third instance 21.
Okay, so like approximately 21, okay, all right. Guy, you were waving your hand at me. If you say what I think you're going to say.
Sorry?
It would be out of character not to, Chair, but I'd certainly support Councillor Alexander's request for a site visit.
Chair, I don't see the point. I actually know the road quite well. I mean, I used to have my first ever car. I used to get serviced in a small independent garage long gone that operated up that road. I mean, St Andrews Road is what it is. It's a bit of an architectural mess, if I'm honest. We all seem to have site visits, and will you actually make that one if we have a site visit? Because we all seem to have it just seems to be a means of delaying something, and I'm not too sure what we'd gain from it. I mean, the photos are fairly clear. You can see what the road is like. It's St Andrews Road is the photos of something of a architectural mashup. Looking down one side, it's sort of garages and back gardens on one side, and looking upwards you've got these ultra modern mews houses, and then some quite 60s and 70s houses on the other side with off-street driveway parking, and then it just sort of at the end of the road there's a sharp turn up towards Cromwell Road.
Katja is desperate to interject something as well, so.
I just wanted to ask the question because the Georgian houses are only the ones from 93 going that way, and the ones behind the modern mews houses, they aren't listed buildings. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And the garages or the ones in front on St Andrews Road, are they included in the listed?
So all the garages are Curtis listed, so they are covered by the listing, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not very enthusiastic about a site visit. Personally, I lived on Cromwell Road for 10 years, so I know the road very, very well. So I'm inclined to sort of just dig in a little more into any other questions or what's not quite answered or clear about this is inciting the urge for a site visit. I'm going to let Andrew speak next.
I mean, well, you've moved things on now, Chair, but I was going to express my frustration about how often that we get to a certain stage in proceedings and a request for a site visit comes up, and I appreciate that sometimes they're useful, but it seems to be a recurring theme. So I'm not enthusiastic about doing a site visit. I did my own today, to be fair. I did a drive by, but nonetheless, I think that in the officer's presentation and the information provided, the photos provided, access to Google Maps and whatnot, I think there should be sufficient information to make a decision tonight.
Absolutely agree.
I agree as well.
In which case, I'm afraid I'm not going to put it to a vote for a site visit, just because clearly the numbers aren't there. I'm really sorry. Does anybody else have something to say about the application? No.
Are we moving on to the debate now rather than
Well, yeah,
questions?
we've moved to the debate, and then we took a slight back step to questions. But if there is, Leslie and Guy, you both have concerns. If there's anything that you want to ask a question about, you're welcome to at this stage. But otherwise, let's debate and talk out what your senses are in order to get to some sort of clarity. So I'll take yours, Guy, and then maybe move to Leslie. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's a relatively small development. The reason I was kind of keen for a site visit was that we've had, well, the level of objections to quite a small development like this seem quite significant. Seem to have been a lot of them. Looking at the site, an awful lot of the objections and an awful lot of what's in the officer's report seem to emphasise the need for this development if there were to, because it is at the end of the day a garden grab, right? I appreciate it's being developed over what was a former garage, but it's also taking a huge chunk out of the back garden of that property. And it's in a row of properties, which includes listed buildings, that don't have any development on them. I've had similar applications in my ward, and it's yet another case where there's an officer's report in front of us saying, you want to bear in mind this factor, that factor, and the other factor, but at the end of the day, we're cramming in houses to the highest possible density over and over again, as much as we possibly can. And the neighbours and the other residents of this local area, including one of the local councillors, are here to tell us that we shouldn't give it permission, and that there is something worth protecting here, and that this two-storey, largely development, will change what that street is in a way that the neighbours are not happy with, and in a way that the local community doesn't seem to be happy with. And I do think that is worth, if they're saying that there's something there that's worth protecting, us going and seeing if it is or not. Because I don't think it is captured in the officer's report. I know it wasn't on similar cases. I've got no reason to dislike this development. It looks like a perfectly nice little house, but there are an awful lot of factors at play. And yeah, I'm not familiar with the space. I'm not familiar with the site, and I would like to see it. I find it very hard to believe that this house will be subservient to its surroundings when its surroundings are single-storey garages in part.
Oh, Leslie, then Lorraine.
Well, I agree with everything that Guy has said, but also I'm worried about the size of the garden if you start splitting it. And I know in my ward I had a similar situation where you had a lovely little close, and somebody wanted to build a bit on the side of it and knock down the wall, and before you knew where you were, they'd all half knocked or knocked down the wards, and the whole place looks an absolute mess. I think there's something there to protect, and I'd like to see it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just as there's been recent commentary over garden grabbing and the sort of principle of that, what I need to do really is to highlight within the report on page 85, it does talk about policy DM21 of the site allocations and DM policies, so part of the local plan, so it needs to have maximum weight. And that talks about the circumstances in which development in existing garden land can be considered, and obviously it's a matter of individual committee members' judgment as to whether it meets that policy or not, but the guidance is there. The officer advice is that it does meet that policy as well. And then sort of we've had a recent similar case like this that some members will remember. Councillor Potts is nodding. 6 Clyde Park. It was a DCA decision, and this is similar. Obviously would be considered on its own merits, but again it was the sort of final bit of a back garden. It had its own road frontage. The officer advice there was similar to this one, to support the scheme. The committee did consider it and refused permission on it, but that appeal was allowed, and you know, it's not a guarantee that exactly the same would happen, but instinctively I think the same would happen at any appeal, just to advise the committee.
Thank you. Lorraine, did you want to? Or no? Okay. So for me, I was quite concerned about the lack of parking and the parking visitor permits, because I think there is a problem. It is a massive equalities issue, as members have said. You know, what if a doctor needs to come? What if a midwife needs to come? What if somebody needs a carer to come visit and there's not going to be that potential? And I'm really compelled by our transport officers' reasoning for not wanting to provide visitor permits and or parking permits itself. And for that, it makes me feel like this isn't it's not going to be it's not going to meet the equalities issues that we require from a development, because I don't think we can provide or allow the parking permits that we would require for somebody living there. And for that, I'm kind of inclined against it at this point.
Registered carers are allowed permits. They wouldn't be dedicated to one address. Blue Badge are entitled to apply for a Blue Badge Bay. So please don't be concerned that people with mobility needs wouldn't be allowed to. Those are exceptions. What we're trying to deal with is trying to reduce the dependency on car ownership, and these are but as Gary clearly said, when it's one property, we just give the advice, and that's because more people were concerned about the impact on the parking available than there were with concerns like yourself. But the concerns you've just addressed are allowable in our current rules for permits.
Thank you, that's helpful. Andrew, then Fabian.
I assume we've moved on to the debate section. I'm inclined to support this, and I'm drawn to what Gary said a moment ago about the policy DM21 on site allocations development management policies with regards to loss of private garden space. And it says, states that development will not be permitted unless the proposal would represent a more efficient use of land where higher densities are more appropriate, and I think that applies here, or the development will result in a significant improvement to the urban design of the area, and I think that very much applies here as well. When you go down St Andrews Road, it's a rather haphazard road at the moment, in terms of bits of it are developed, bits of it aren't. Bits of it are quite dilapidated, including the backs of garages, gardens and whatnot that are backed onto from Richmond Road. And I think, and in particular this particular site very much falls into that category. And I think developing it increases the urban appeal of St Andrews Road, and it makes more efficient use of the land. So I'm going to be supporting this.
Yeah, I'm going to be supporting this as well. I mean, I think the thing that, you know, page 111 of the agenda, where you can see the 4 mews houses, very ultra modern, and then there's sort of this place quite subservient to that, and then obviously equally subservient to the house behind. You know, we're talking about replacing what looks like an absolute bomb site with, you know, a small house that's subservient to everything. And it's not actually going to impact, if you're going to be able to sort of walk down Richmond Road and suddenly see this thing stuck in front of one of these listed houses, then of course that wouldn't be okay. But this is going to back onto an impact on St Andrews Road, which is a architectural mismatch and a sort of a mishmash already. So I don't really see it's going to do any harm. It will give the occupants of 93 a, you know, landscape garden, where at the moment they seem to have just a sort of a bit of an overgrown mess. And I dare say the income from this will probably fund the tidying up at the back. But I just think, the sort of the impact, the 4 modern houses bang next door to it, they are so bang next door to the development site. They sort of, they set the precedent, and I don't really think that something that's very small and modest in comparison to these 4 mews houses can be thrown out, and then that would I think would be crushed on appeal. And it's I appreciate there's issues with parking. I think maybe the issue allow the occupants 1 permit rather than none might be the way to go, but I'll leave that to the officer's discretion. But I certainly take the transport officer's advice about the fact that blue badge holders, visitors, care workers and stuff like that, that's all exempt and allowed anyway. So that solves that worry. So I don't think rejecting this would stand up an appeal, and it's it is what it is. I'm going to be supporting it. I just don't see any reason why not to.
Thank you. Lorraine.
Thank you. I am quite concerned today about the legacy of Bristol, and we're just sort of disregarding buildings, and conservation areas, and I've got an obsession obviously with people not just taking over green spaces and just building where they want to build. There's something about I would more likely and be inclined to vote for a bungalow, 1 building, which was more in line with the garage next door to it. I have a concern that we're setting a precedent, and we will just see all the garages turning into, single dwelling, double dwellings, whatever. So I'm more in line to object to it because I think it's too tall, and I would like to see it in line with the garages. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, now the equalities have been sorted by the transport officer, and I don't think this, if we rejected it, it would the appeal would be overturned. So I'm more than happy to vote in favour of this one.
Anybody else got anything to say, or should we move to a vote? Okay, so let's vote for officer recommendation. Anybody like to second that? I'll let Andrew do it because you had the last one. Technical point.
Sorry, Chair, we're just moving the officer's recommendation unamended.
Yes, yeah, unamended. Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Andrew.
4.
Fabian.
4.
Katya.
4.
Chris.
4.
Lorraine.
Against.
Guy.
Against.
Leslie. Oh, awkward. Also against for me, which makes it a tie.
Yeah, you do have the casting vote, obviously, Chair, if you choose to use it.
I'm going to use my casting vote against, I'm afraid. So the officer recommendation falls. Can we... That's it? Well... Gary.
Chair, just to advise, all that's happened is the motion to move the officer recommendation has failed. So we need an alternative motion.
Exactly. Can we refer it back to maybe come back as a lower building?
No, Chair, because you have to determine the application before you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would anybody like to give me... Go on, Guy.
Propose we defer pending a site visit.
I'm against that.
I'm against that.
You're against that. Okay.
Sorry, just to check, was there a seconder for that?
Who would like to second a site visit? Okay, all right. Okay, all those in favour of a site visit deferred on pending a site visit. Leslie. 4. Guy.
4.
Leslie, Lorraine.
Against, because I get the plan. Sorry. I just think I voted against and I don't need to
Chris.
see it.
Against.
Katya.
Against.
Fabian.
Against.
I thought I was going to make things difficult for you, but I don't think I am, so against.
Against. I'm also against a site visit. So, okay, so that falls. Gary?
I'll try a suggestion, Chair. This may not be pivotal to individual votes, but there has been discussion around the parking permit issue. As I said, you're not deciding that precisely here and now, but what you do have on page 104 of your papers is, and it's advice note 8, and it's the standard wording that we use every time in these circumstances on restriction of parking permits. It's open to you as a committee to remove, modify that, if that makes a difference to your view on the application. But what I will emphasise, it's only an advice, it's not a condition, it's not an obligation on a Section 106 agreement. But if that does make a difference to your decision making, that's something I can just suggest that might get you out of the current stalemate.
Thank you.
What page was that again, please, Chet?
It's page 104, and halfway down you'll see you're into the advice notes there on this application. It's number 8.
I mean, personally, I'm not compelled to add in parking because I'm very convinced by the reasons that we don't have parking permits there. That's not going to do it for me, I'm afraid. But I am personally quite compelled as well by the height and the land infilling elements of it, and whether or not it does or does not set a precedent. Guy, you've got lots of opinions on things that we could technically reject this upon.
Chair, I was about to say my main concerns were with, I had two sets of concerns with this application. One was around that permits issue that Gary's drawn attention to. The other was, as you say, the height and the subservience to the surrounding buildings. And I get the feeling that whilst there might be a consensus on this, there might be a majority on this committee to grant in favour if one of those things was dealt with. I have to admit, if someone was to propose, say, grant subject to the removal of the prohibition on visitors' permits, which might deal with that equalities concern, I think I would probably be swayed by the mood of the room.
Shall I propose that then, Chair?
That has been dealt with, hasn't it, by the transport officer?
Well, not fully.
No.
So, okay, so that's...
Yeah, so it's not fully dealt with because so disabled blue badge parking would mean that somebody who was there who had a blue badge could park there, or a visitor with a blue badge could park there, as could a social worker or care worker. But other visitors still couldn't come to visit under the current setup. And
well, so basically we move, so officer recommendation, but also we move advice note 8.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest removing the last clause of advice note 8, which is just that the sentence would end, are ineligible for resident parking permits.
Personally, I'd go with the idea of just cap it to one parking permit, rather than, because...
So if I may, Fabian, my concern is not with the residents of this property being able to park outside their own property or not. It's whether a carer or a midwife or someone who is not a full-time professional medical person is able to visit the property or not, which they can't currently under the EPV scheme.
According to the transport office.
I've just looked it up on the website. The people who can get visitors parking under the scheme that I believe the officer is referring to are professional full-time carers. So in other words, when they're coming, it's a professionalised thing. They have a card that lets them
You
park
do have
there.
a point, because it can be family members coming to visit and stuff like that to do care.
Family that's a carer.
Yeah. Okay.
as well as
I'll
not
go
all-
with that. I'll
yeah.
accept that.
Yeah, because I think as well it's important to note not everybody with mobility issues has a blue badge either as well. So, yeah. Leslie?
Are these parking spaces going to be white lines or yellow lines?
It's going to be permit controlled, so you'd have to park where you can legally, but it's simply removing the prohibition on visitors' permits.
And I think the visitors' permits, are they named or something?
No, it's like the householder has them and you like hand them out to whoever comes to visit you, isn't it? Yeah. I don't get visitor permits, so I don't know how it works really. But yeah, that's basically you give it to whoever comes. Yeah. And you have like a set amount a year, I believe.
Whilst I agree that I agree with the idea of having parking permits for that sort of thing, I still don't like the whole thing anyway.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Well, I'm happy to second that.
I think.
Yeah, okay,
Right,
so I think we've got...
But I think we need Gary just to sum up a technical element of this for us.
Yeah, but, my plea really, Chair, is if someone's moving something and it relates to advice 8, if they can be really clear as to what's coming out of that, then we'll be able to action that if the motion succeeds and the decision's made. So the specific wording in advice 8, the final sentence refers to both residence parking permits as well as visitor parking permits, if in an RPZ, which this is. So if whoever's moving the motion can really clarify what's being struck out of that, then that will help us.
That was Councillor Portney, I think.
I think the wording I suggested that Councillor Breckles took up, in very specific terms, it would then read, you're advised that the local planning authority has recommended to the Highways Authority, which administers the existing controlled parking zone residence parking scheme, of which the development forms part, that the development shall be treated as car-free, low car, and the occupiers are ineligible for residence parking permits. Full stop.
So you delete as well as visitor parking permits if in a residence parking scheme. Those are the words that are deleted.
Okay. Is that clear? Right. Is everybody clear on what we've discussed?
I'm not totally clear on that one. Are we voting to do the parking as a separate item?
No. What we're voting to remove. What we're doing is taking away the prohibition on visitor permits, so that if somebody needs a family carer to come and visit them and deal with that, that will be permitted rather than prohibited. So that's the only thing we're taking off.
So we're then going to vote separately for whether...
No, it's an amended... It's the officer's recommendation plus we allow visitor permits because there could be cases where a family member needs to come and care for the occupant, and that's so we're therefore going to make sure that visitor permits can be allowed so that can happen. Mm-hmm. That's the change. That's the only change.
Yes. So,
as I understand it, the proposal is granting approval subject to the change that Councillor Portney made to advice note 8.
Yeah.
So do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second. Or was Jack going to second?
Fabian, it was your motion.
Pardon?
You were proposing it, weren't you?
No, it was Councillor Portney, I think.
Well, you...
I'll second that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right, that's right.
If guys don't want to propose it.
Yeah, no. Leslie, are you clear on what we're voting on?
Yep.
Not still, because what I'm saying is, are we proposing that this particular, if we agree this, then we've agreed the whole lot?
Yes.
Well, no, I'm not happy at all.
Okay, all right. Okay. So we'll start voting on. So it is the plan of the recommendation to approve, but with the amendment that we've just discussed. So Leslie, you're voting against for Leslie. Lorraine?
Against.
Guy?
4.
Chris?
4.
Katja? 4. Fabian?
4.
Andrew?
4.
Still against for me, but it still passes with that amendment. Thank you very much. We got there in the end. Just
Well,
do a quick...
I do apologise, Chair, but I did not expect, as I'm a substitute, I did not expect only 2 cases to be done in 2.5 hours, and I have childcare at home with my grandson, so I'm going to have to leave.
All right, I completely accept that, but it is our duty as councillors to give these applications the time that they want. So,
yeah, I agree.
Thank you for
sit on a lot
serving.
of committees, and this is the first one I've ever gone 2.5 hours for 2. So
okay, thank you, Chris. Bye bye.
That's why I agreed to sub, thinking it would be well finished by now. But I'm going to have to leave without hearing the third one.
Fabulous. Okay, we are going to, we have gotten to the end of that item. Let's move on to the next one. You could complain as much about how much time it takes, but not if we keep on, I'm not the only one responsible for that. Okay, we're going to go on to our third item, which is Church Road in Redcliffe. We have one public forum speaker, Mr. Usman Yabuk, I think. Sorry, I pronounced it terribly. 1 minute, please.
Evening all. The application has reached committee following a lengthy process with your planning officers. Prior to this, formal pre-application consultation was undertaken with the council, local stakeholders, including nearby residents, businesses, local councillors, Ruth, Afzal, Barry and Jenny, Church Road Action Group. We urge the members of the committee to support the recommendation for approval in line with Planning Department's position and grant planning permission for this long-term vacant and undeveloped site, which is located on a key route into the city centre. The site was last considered by committee in November 2019 when 2 applications were submitted. The message was clear that the site had to be considered as one and that issues relating to height, scale, mass and overlooking needed to be addressed. The application before you is a culmination of years of work with the planning and urban design officers who supported it in principle. The scheme before you is 5 flats, 3 houses and 3 commercial units facing Church Road. It's a generally mixed-use development. The height of the building is 3 stories on Church Road, Dove Lane frontage, reducing down to 2
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to the officer presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. This is a full planning application for the demolition of the existing buildings and the erection of a mixed-use development comprising 8 residential apartments and houses and 2 commercial units and an office unit. The application site includes both number 66 and 68 to 70 Church Road. We have received separate planning applications for proposals on these sites previously. However, they have now been combined to form a single application site. The site is not allocated in the local plan for any particular land use and is not located within a conservation area or in close proximity to any listed buildings. The surrounding area contains a mix of land uses, including commercial, industrial and also neighbouring residential uses. Here we can see an image of the Church Road frontage. The existing buildings here are 2-storey in height, and 66 Church Road, which is the building to the right with the cream render, includes a storage yard to the rear, which is accessed from Dove Lane. These buildings are understood to have been vacant for some time and have had commercial uses at the ground floor with residential accommodation above. Here is a view along Dove Lane looking south, and just to clarify, this is a different Dove Lane to the Dove Lane which the committee were considering earlier. The storage yards can be seen to the left of the image, and the building to the right in the distance is the Octavius Hunt factory building. There are double yellow lines along this road and also a loading bay, which can be seen in the foreground of this image. Here's another view looking east from Dove Lane, showing the existing storage area. The roofs of the residential properties on Cowper Street can just be seen above the wall. And there's also an electricity substation as well to the rear of 68 to 70 Church Road, which is the building with the grey roof. This is a view showing the Church Road and Cowper Street junction, and the flank wall of number 70 Church Road can be seen in this image. The neighbouring site, which is outside this application site, is used for car parking and bin storage associated with the Stockwood Chambers development. So as mentioned, there have been previous planning applications for proposed development at this site, and the two most recent applications were considered by this committee in November 2019. These were refused for reasons including the impact on numbers 1 to 4 Cowper Street in terms of height, scale, massing, overlooking and overbearing relationship, a poor quality living environment for future occupiers, concerns around design including issues of height, scale and massing, and also that the two proposals which were being considered individually at that time would adversely impact on the potential development of the sites which they neighboured. Following these previous refusals, it's understood that the applicant has undertaken some engagement locally, and pre-application advice has also been provided. So under this single application, a mixed-use development is proposed of retail and office and also residential. In terms of the consultation undertaken in connection with this application, there have been 2 rounds undertaken. Initially, there were 14 objections received from surrounding properties, and following reconsultation, a further 7 objections were received. The main areas of concern were as follows in summary: impact on neighbour amenity, which was on similar grounds to those mentioned in the previous refusals, and also concerns around highway safety, access and also parking. Moving on, this shows the proposed block plan of the new site boundary in the context of the neighbouring site and also the Cowper Street properties. This slide shows the proposed floor plans. At the bottom of the slide is the proposed ground floor, and you can see the 2 retail units which are shaded in blue. There is an office which would be accessed from Dove Lane, which is shown shaded in pink. And it should be noted that a flat was previously proposed here, which was an area of concern in relation to the previous refusals and poor living conditions. The 3 houses are also shown shaded in yellow. And then at the top of this slide, you can see the first floor plan, which shows 3 apartments there that are shaded in green. And then we have the second floor plan, which is at the bottom of this slide, with the remaining 2 apartments there shaded in green. This slide shows the layout of the proposed apartments at the first floor level. It should be noted there's some external amenity space which is proposed. The apartments would meet space standards, are also considered to have acceptable outlook, and bin and bike stores would also be provided for occupiers of the flats at the ground floor level. Looking at the houses, these houses would be 2 stories in height. They would each have garden areas to the rear. Each property would have 2 bedrooms at first floor level, and again, individual bike and bin stores are also proposed. Apologies. This slide shows the proposed elevations, and the elevation at the top we can see is the view from Dove Lane. So you'd have the 3-storey element that fronts onto Church Road and then curves around to Dove Lane before it then steps down to the office with the flat above and the 3 houses. The elevation in the middle of the slide shows the view through the 3-storey element and also from the gardens of the properties on Cowper Street. The houses proposed as part of the previously refused application included a 2nd floor, and this has now been omitted, which has reduced the height of the houses and is considered to result in a much better relationship with these neighbouring properties. At 1st floor level, high-level windows are proposed in the rear elevation, which is considered would prevent overlooking, and there are also roof lights proposed, which would provide additional light to the 1st floor. The elevation you can see at the bottom of the slide shows the view from Church Road, and this shows the glazed frontage for the retail units. Just focusing in on the relationship between the proposed houses and the neighbouring properties on Cowper Street. Here are some views looking north which show the separation distances between these 2 properties. Here are some proposed aerial and other visual images that have been provided. The main image there on this slide shows the Church Road and Dove Lane frontages, and you can also see on this image the substation in behind as well as the neighbouring residential properties. Here we have some more views as well from various angles. And finally, a rendering which shows the corner from Church Road. As you can see, red brick is proposed, and the scheme also incorporates architectural detailing as well, such as recessed windows and cornices. And overall, the design is considered to be a significant improvement compared to the schemes which have previously been considered and refused. Moving on to the summary of the recommendation, there are considered to be benefits in seeing these vacant sites brought back into active use with a mixed-use development that includes housing. It is acknowledged that a number of changes have been made in response to the previous refusals. Whilst the concerns that have been raised regarding parking and access are noted, the development would be car-free, and the previous applications were also not refused on transport grounds. The omission of the 2nd floor of the proposed houses is considered to have addressed previous concerns regarding loss of light, over-dominance and the overbearing relationship, and also the changes to the windows are considered to have addressed overlooking concerns. Consideration has also been given to odour and noise from the factory use, and subject to conditions, the proposal is considered to provide an acceptable level of living conditions for future occupiers, and it's therefore recommended that the application be approved subject to conditions.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Andrew, and then Guy, and then Leslie.
Just the one. I was struck by the amount and extent of comments from the police in this report, because I don't think I've seen a report with quite so much from the police. I note that they said no objections, but then they listed a number of things they would like to see conditioned. And I just want to ask what the state of play is vis-a-vis those, because I don't think I saw them in the conditions, but forgive me if I missed those. But there was quite a detailed list, so I just wanted to check that.
Yeah, in terms of the police's comments, those have been copied in full in the report. What we have done is, in terms of the recommendations that they've made, applied conditions where we can. For example, with regard to lighting, So the applicant will be required to submit details to us for approval. They also made a recommendation regarding the kind of recess to the entrances to the houses, and recommended that that should be no more than 1 metre. It appears that the depth of those is around kind of 1.3, so it does slightly exceed the guidance there in terms of their recommendation. But we considered that and kind of balance that with the provision of the bin store, which kind of sort of next to the door. So on balance, that was considered to be acceptable. They also made recommendations as well with regards to the entrance door to the flats and the specification that should be, and we've included that as an advice note for the applicant. So they're aware of kind of what the design requirement is there.
Thank you. Lorraine, then was it Guy? Sorry, Guy, then Leslie.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to reassure valued colleagues, I'm honestly not trolling you. But on page 122, I'm looking at the report around coal, which makes it very clear that this is a high-risk area for unrecorded coal mining that might present a risk to public safety, and that the only thing that we have to say that everything will be fine is a desktop exercise based on the history of the site, beneath which is a paragraph concerning mined gas that's really clear that local planning authorities should seek their own technical advice on the hazards that may exist and appropriate measures to be implemented from technically competent personnel. And I couldn't spot anything in the conditions or the rest of the document that seemed to deal with those two issues. And whilst they might seem outlandish, they're exactly the kind of thing that you see councillors on the news explaining that they trusted the technical report that they saw. And in a case where it says you should be aware of this and ask questions about it, I felt we should.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for Fabian. I'm chairing this, not you, so please, just waiting for the officer to find the paperwork or the answer to the question.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just getting to the right section there. Yeah, in terms of the Coal Authority's response, they advise that they don't object to this application. In terms of kind of the validation requirements, in terms of what was required, in terms of the supporting information, understand from the comments that they made that was reviewed. That isn't considered to be a reason to refuse the application.
Does that answer your question?
I just have one minor supplementary, which is that in the previous application, my concerns were somewhat addressed by, there was, I think the paragraph made reference to during the building regulation or building control process that would follow on from the planning, that could be addressed. I was wondering if there was such a way of conditioning this as to ensure that a more detailed and a more thorough assessment took place before anything happened.
So, Chair, I think the building regulations stage is the correct mechanism for fully resolving this issue. However, sorry to talk about an advice note again, but I think this is right for an advice note on to explain that the Coal Authority have made comments on the application, and therefore this should be applied when the detailed scheme is put forward for building regulations, because what we can't do is condition another regime. So an advice note would be one way of linking the two.
Thank you. Okay, Leslie, then Katja.
I've heard this one before, because you can't forget a name like Octavius Hunt. Anyway, what's proposed looks an awful lot better than what's already there, but I am a bit concerned about the fire that there was in the Octavius Hunt chimney. How far is that chimney away, and what effect would the chemicals have on the surrounding area if the fire got, if there was another fire and it was worse?
So I think this image on screen shows the location of the chimney. I don't know if this is the one where there was a fire, but here you can see in relation to the site. Consultation was undertaken with the fire authority previously, and they raised no objections. And that was also comments were also received from the Health and Safety Executive as well, who also raised no objections.
Okay, does that answer your question? Oh, good. Okay, then Katja.
There's two things that show up in this building. I'm a bit concerned about the back windows of the house. Does that mean they're slatted and they can't actually look out of it? It just seems like storing people. And the other one is that it's not very green. There's no sort of proposals for trying to... That area isn't very green as it is, and it could do with a bit more planting.
Yeah, just to clarify the proposals with respect to those first floor windows, what the applicant is proposing is essentially a timber kind of infill panel in the elevation, and then just a high level window together with roof lights in the roof as kind of an approach which deals with the overlooking concern but also provides kind of some light to the rear of those properties.
So they can't look out at all. When they...
Can you use the mic, Fabian? Otherwise we can't hear you if you're going...
Got there. So those are bathrooms and dressing room, or bathrooms and they're not bedrooms?
That's my understanding, according to the plans, yeah.
I'm trying to find that picture. There it is. Oh, I see. Okay, that makes difference. That's different then. The other one is the question of greening. Is there some sort of way we can make this building a bit more green, more planty?
So more planty in windows.
Yeah, the applicant has actually submitted a landscaping scheme with this development that includes things such as a green wall adjacent to the substation to kind of green sort of that aspect for occupiers of the proposed apartments. They've also actually as well put forward what they have called an environmental strategy, which also includes things such as bird boxes, bee boxes and insect blocks, which is quite well considered. So in terms of kind of landscaping there, we also have the gardens. Planters are proposed together with sort of water butts. So it seems kind of quite a well-considered scheme in terms of kind of landscaping and kind of what's possible within the constraints.
Okay, thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just wanted to know whether the place was going to be rented out or sold as individual units, because that will come down to whether they look after the living walls and the planter boxes and things, because there's not a very good record of those, of being looked after or maintained.
Yeah, that we don't know. Whether they will be rented or owner occupied. They are essentially open market houses and flats.
Thank you. Fabian?
Okay. The point I wanted to say after Guy had spoken earlier, trying to be helpful, because I actually live at the other end of Redfield, on the sort of Redfield-St George border, is that housing in that area, because the whole area was a coal mining area, all the way out to, through a lot of East Bristol, you have to have a coal mining survey done anyway. It's sort of part of the process of purchasing property. So, and it's also been, Gary's also said about how the building regs would address that. But I think there are processes in place, given the location, that would ensure that the proper survey was carried out, and that's supposed to map out where the nearest entrances to the mines might have been related to the site. So obviously if there's proof or evidence that there's a mining entrance to a mine right on top of where you want to build, that's potentially a problem. But that's supposed to be checked by them. There's a body, I don't think it's the National Coal Board, but there's a body that actually does the mining surveys.
So I think we've probably exhausted questions. We can move to the debate. Anybody got any particular thoughts or stances they want to lay out? Got Fabian, then Guy.
Yeah, whenever I'm getting the bus into town, I go past this site. It's been an eyesore since the late 90s, if not, you know. I think I vaguely might remember one of the properties having some kind of business in it, car parks or something like that. But it's been empty for so long. It's a terrible, terrible eyesore. And, you know, my constituents, you know, the bus from my ward goes past this site as well, so they all see it. And I just think, you know, the site at present is an absolute eyesore. I know that, you know, the exact location isn't completely perfect, but a lot of things in Bristol aren't. And to be honest, I really like the main front building. I think it's a huge improvement of what's there now. It provides some more housing, and I really, really like the curved front, modern front. It's a bit of a statement, a bit of an entrance to the sort of this part of Church Road when you come out of Lawrence Hill and you head into Moorfields and Redfield. So, you know, I particularly like the curved front on it, and I just think, you know, it's a huge improvement, and I'm going to be supporting it.
Great. Guy?
Yeah, I really like it too. I think the architecture, I think, is just fantastic, but in planning terms, I think it speaks to what a good job the developer's actually done of consultation. Didn't have to do a statement of community involvement because it's too small of a development, but engage with the local community anyway, and engage with local councillors anyway. And I think that's the reason that this application's in front of us with no objections at all, which is absolutely fantastic. If as long as that advice note can be added so that someone is genuinely checking that it's not going to fall into the ground or explode, then I think I'd very happily vote for this one. Thanks, Chair.
I imagine everybody would be enthusiastic about it not falling into the ground. I think it's probably a smart move bringing it together as one application too. Andrew?
Sometimes when you see things here, it's hard to imagine what they will be like in real life. So, no, I'm not going to go down. I'm not going to crack that joke again. Yeah, I think this looks like a really good proposal, a mixed use education, employment space, as well as residential. Replace it, you know, that site as an eyesore as it stands. So this is a really good, hopefully a really good development that will improve that site and perhaps breathe a bit of new life into the area.
Thank you. Are we ready to move to a vote? With enthusiasm, officer recommendation, seconder from Guy. Okay. All those in favour?
Just before we vote, can I just clarify if that includes a request for the advice note asked?
Yes.
Just wanted to...
Yeah.
Officer recommendation plus advice note, I think.
Yep.
So is that Councillor Poultney moving?
No, I'm moving.
Okay.
And Councillor Poultney for seconding. Okay, it feels like it's fairly solid, so should we just do a show of hands of all those in favour? Great, that's unanimous. Thank you very much for coming. See you next time.